Okay, while people are still jumping in, I'll do just a few intro slides and then our guest for today will take over. So welcome again to Stuttgart Power Platform User Group for first or second edition of February. And as always, you can find us on YouTube where you can find recordings on Meetup, follow the upcoming sessions, and of course on Twitter and LinkedIn. With us, with you again, myself and Christian will be having the next week session. So our goal, as always, trying to connect you with the best speakers out there, and we try to do it weekly. For now, I think, our goal is accomplished. And just announcement, as I was mentioning it a few more times. So myself and Nicola next week Tuesday are starting a bit different format from this one. Data Jazz on Tuesdays, it will be every second Tuesday of the month, and our first guest is Chris Webb. So it will be interesting, not in the form of session, more Q&A discussions going with Chris through his career and accomplishments and everything. So follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Streaming will be live on YouTube 6 p.m. Central European or North or 12 North US time. So New York time 12. So see you also on Tuesday. What's coming up? So as I said, on Tuesday, Data Jazz. So it will be monthly. Then Wednesday, Alexander Arvidsson is coming with 5 ways how to misrepresent the data. Then 23rd of February, Reed Heavens is with us with a session about buttons and beyond buttons in Power BI. And not 23rd, it's my mistake with Steve Campbell. It's the first Wednesday in March. Steve Campbell is with us. I still didn't put the session name. We are still discussing what's the best pick for our audience. And that's just a bit of maintenance upkeeping from my side. And I would like to again welcome and say thank you to Scott for joining us, having time to video with us. I know in Microsoft it's quite a busy time. So thank you again. And Scott will be talking to you today about Dataverse and the Dynamics 365. So Scott, welcome. Stage is yours.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's good to be here. And I'm glad to see Chris on your upcoming Data Jazz. Chris is a colleague of mine, and so you'll enjoy that conversation with Chris. Let me try this. See if I can take advantage of some of the Teams features there. Hopefully that helps out a little bit. So let me introduce myself. My name is Scott Sewell. I'm on the Power BI CAT team, which is really a customer advisory team that's focused on enterprise size adoption of Power BI into their expanding the platform, their usage, really working with customers to try to see how do we really help them take advantage of this incredible product that they have. However, I didn't really start off on the Power BI side. I come from the Dynamics or Dataverse side, and I spent the last 14 years, I guess, implementing Dynamics into customers. But over time, I kept finding the same problem or the same opportunity over and over, and that was that inside these applications, there was so much rich data, but it was a real challenge to help expose that data to the decision makers that needed to be able to make the decisions. And selfishly on my part, when I was on the consulting side, I wanted to make sure that the people who wrote the checks to who purchased the projects could see value for themselves so that they could engage me for the next project. And so I looked always into how do I make the data or the project, how do I make it more valuable? And I kept finding that reporting was one of those skills and one of those opportunities that was a bit underrepresented in a lot of projects, but I had an opportunity to bring that data out. And I found, early on, it was In the very early days, it was Crystal reports, then it was SSRS reports, and then it became Power Pivot, and finally got Power BI in place not a few years back, and it really opened up the world for me and to help my customers. So I understand in this conversation, there are people that come from the Power BI side, and people who come from the Dataverse or Power Apps side of things, or the Dynamics side. And I probably should put a diagram in here. It's like a Venn diagram. A lot of times in organizations, you have the business application side and the business intelligence side. And it's like a Venn diagram that there's like very little, if any, overlap between the people who do the implementations of either one of the other. What I want to do is try to help both sides see the value that the other side can bring to the projects and bring to the customer, and find ways that they can help each other accelerate and take advantage of these tools that so many customers already have in place. So let's go ahead and get started, and let's talk about why should I care about this? If you're coming from the perspective of a Dataverse, or coming from one of the business application side, you really want to expand the value and the visibility of the apps that you have. Bringing Power BI into those apps gives that user a 360-degree view that we've always promised and have been challenged to deliver. If you're coming from the Power BI side, you may not be familiar with, but Dataverse has some built-in charts and graphs that are part of, sort of legacy. They've been there for a long time, but they have some challenges because they're built on a platform and like running on the actual user database. So to govern and protect the experience of the users, it's limited, as it's governed so that only 50,000 records can be displayed in a report at a time, just to avoid somebody running a report that brings the whole system to its knees while it tries to render. It also, the built-in reports inside a Dataverse can only include data that sits inside a Dataverse. So if you have external data, there's not a clean way of being able to show those in those reports or move those in the reports without a great deal of effort. Most of the time it's lift and shift to move it in. And the reports they're inside a Dataverse are very straightforward. They're clean and they're simple and they're great for like an operational user, but they don't have the advanced AI tools that we have in Power BI. So really bringing that visibility together is a helpful thing. And if you're on the Dataverse side, on the Power BI side, and you're working to try to show a Dataverse colleague why or how you can help bring value into their app, these are some of the things you want to be aware of. Additionally, we can build in contextual reports so that if I am in a record, I can go and get a 360-degree review from that record and go off into a lot of different reports. As a Power BI person, you know that you've got reports in different capacities. There are different reports in different locations, and there's probably not, because you've put so much work into building these, sometimes there's reports that don't get utilized because people just either forget about them, or they're not aware of them, or they go to the ones that they're most comfortable with, and some of the other ones they just don't get to. We found inside of our own team, inside the Power BI CAT team, we found the same problem. We have a lot of reports accessible to us inside of Microsoft, but we found that we often fail to go get all the different reports when we're going to sit down and have a conversation with Fabricam. We're going to have a conversation with Fabricam. So we're originally going off into multiple silos to pull the different reports that were related to Fabricam. Now, by using the integration with Power Apps and integration with Dataverse, I go to the Fabricam record and I can get data from a lot of different reports pulled together and take advantage of that. So again, you're finding ways in which you can improve the usability of Power BI and improve the usability of Dataverse by working together. Finally, the real benefit is ultimately it helps you get to adoption, people take advantage of the reports or the applications that you have. And my little mantra at the end is here on the bottom. I'll get my head out of the way, but is the idea that Power BI is the best way to expose the value of the data in your app to the people who write the checks, to the people who need it to make those decisions. So let me take a look. We're going to take a look real quickly at several different areas and kind of talk through what's available, some of the things you may be aware of, especially when I'm talking to a mixed audience. Half the group knows some of this and the other half knows the other part of it, but really we're trying to help cross educate and help each other find ways that we can expand what we deliver to the customer or what we deliver to our business by collaboration. So let's take a look. We're going to talk about Power BI integration into model-driven apps, Dynamics 365 CE being an example of a model-driven app. Talk about scenarios, talk about system dashboards, integration. Then we're going to talk about the aspects of how do you get the data, how do you report on the data inside of Dataverse, as well as connecting to it. What are the options you have? Dataverse, I should clarify, if you're coming from a Power BI standpoint and you're not familiar with Dataverse, Dataverse is not I wouldn't set it up and say it's a database. It's not like another Oracle or another SQL or another Spark, whatever you've got. It's not a database, but it is the data layer that sits underneath Power Apps, including Dynamics 365 CE. So it has this really rich integration back into AAD. It's got a very complex security model of workflows. It's got a form editor in it. It's a lot of things that are there in that data layer that you can take advantage of. But because it has this really complex and rich security model and a lot of things going on inside, it's not as fast as just hitting a SQL table directly, because you're going through a lot of layers of business logic to pull that out. So good, it's a strength and a weakness at the same time. Understanding how do you work with that is really the thing I want to focus on. Connecting to it and best practices, and then I've got a whole list of resources that may be helpful to you over time. So let's look at the first perspective of Power BI integration into Power Apps and Dynamics 365. If you're not familiar with Dynamics 365 CE, it is a customer relationship database, and really looking at contacts and accounts, sales opportunities or service cases, and then a lot of other fracturing ideas off of that group. But ultimately it is a business application a business application focused on helping a business run its own internal processes. And because of its flexibility and customization, it's actually been turned into a lot of different types of business process and a lot of different types of business apps inside of a business. So it's got you wind up seeing a lot of places. I tell you what, this is just a talk. This is actually, I probably should show this later, but it's really talking about the different ways in which you can take a Power BI report and connect it to the different components inside this. We'll talk a little bit more about this. I do want to point out that there is a custom page part of the Power Platform. Custom pages are the next wave of how Power Apps and Dataverse is deployed. We don't currently have an integration, but I'm actually actively working with the team that's building that, and that will be the area that we land on as the primary way going forward. So custom pages, keep your eyes peeled for that area. So let's talk about how we can see it inside of a dashboard, a display report inside of a dashboard. When you go to a Power App, you can open up a dashboard as just embedded right there inside the application. In fact, let me Alt tab and jump over to my environment. And instead of showing you a demo of it, I'll just show you the real thing here. This is a live environment. So in this case, I'm looking at a list of active accounts. I could be looking at a list of active sales opportunities that are out there. Things I can do is I have dashboards that are built into Dataverse, like a sales professional summary. It's a fairly simple dashboard. This is the out of the box experience. Very straightforward funnel charts, etc. But they have some limitations. However, to help expand that, you can take this and embed in a Power BI report as a part of the natural navigation. And so building a system dashboard allows you to then bring this data in, summarize data from both Dynamics or Dataverse, as well as combining with data from outside this. It could be coming from data coming out of SAP or coming out of your inventory system or your another business application that you have. Pulling that together, and summarizing it, and helping show the customer the value of that data. Let me show you, for those of you on the Dataverse side who haven't seen a lot of Power BI, let me show you real quick examples, some of the strengths of how Power BI can help unlock the data that you have inside. So obviously you're familiar with the general click, and it will refactor and refilter across data that you have. You can see, you can navigate with different views of the same data. Like in this case, I'm looking at it by team or user, and I can drill down into an individual team and see who's on that sales team and understand more about the sales that they've made, what's sitting in the pipeline, and how close are they to reaching their goals. And I can then even further, I can drill through to an individual, right click and drill onto a salesperson details and get a summary of just Julian's data. I can see what's going on with Julian, so I could have a coaching conversation with Julian. And I'm seeing things like the smart narrative just gives me a textual description that I can copy and paste into an email if I need to. I can filter it according to an individual month and say, well, let's look at February and see where we are in February and understand that, as well as seeing the closing percentage over time. Even within that, I can look at the products that Julian's doing well at selling. Let's see, obviously they got revenue one on this platinum device. I can get a pop-up tooltip that gives me greater detail about that particular product in the context of Julian's record. Look at other products like an e-reader pen, and it'll pull the graphic for just that one. I can also look in things, a lot of the reports that are built inside of Dataverse and a lot of other applications. It's it pulls the data and reports it as the data exists, which is great, I guess. But one of the things that you often see is in a manager perspective, before they turn over a forecasted pipeline, they say, I'm forecasting you're going to meet 128% of your goal. That's what Julian is telling me as a manager. But I might say, you know what? I know Julian. Julian is a great salesperson, but Julian's a little optimistic sometimes. So before I take that forecast and turn it over to my manager, I might want to put a little bit of an adjustment on top of it, just to have some headroom to make sure that whatever I turn over to my manager is more realistic in terms of what's typically Julian doing. So I can use the what if analysis as a parameter, and let's say that I bring it down by 30%. Now you'll notice as soon as I let go, the qualified pipeline will recalculate and it'll show that this is the new pipeline based on a 30% reduction in the headroom on those pipeline. It's a great way of saying, let me see an adjustment if I change this, if my sales, if I get another pandemic or I get some other product promotion that I think I'm going to increase by 10%. I can redo that and it will refactor all the data without actually changing the underlying data. It's just a what if analysis is a really powerful thing for storytelling within the reports that we have. Let me jump back to this report and look. Let me unfilter that. So I'm just on the south. Let me go up a level here. Drill up, and I'm going to look at things like win-loss ratio, the number of opportunities that I have, and the number of wins or sales that I turn over. Whatever the objective is you're trying to meet. In this case, I'm just using the sales example as an example, and I can see that some people are meeting those objectives, some people are not, and I can highlight across the closed by owner factor. I can highlight different areas like Spencer and Mia and Eric and even Angel are all maybe a little bit below what we're expecting them to be able to accomplish. Within that, if you look above, I'm seeing kind of a filtered list of that, which is pretty normal. But above that, I've got this blue bar, this blue button, and that button is a link to the Power Automate. And if you're if you are only familiar with Power BI and you're not familiar with the rest of the Power Platform, Power Automate is this really incredible workflow automation tool that's part of the platform. And what I can do is tie these two together by saying, I'm going to filter and choose data from within my Power BI report. And as soon as I've filtered it down to the list that I'm interested in, I can click a button and feed that over to a Power Automate workflow or flow, and that will then do whatever I need it to do. Maybe it's sending an email or putting them on a SharePoint list or enrolling them in an outside application to say, I'm giving you some additional sales training. Whatever that is, the nice thing is I've got data that I've selected, I've filtered, I've highlighted, and then I'm taking action on it. And that action can be outside of Dataverse, it can be outside of Power BI, but I've been able to bring all those together by using the Power Automate integration within Power BI. Another aspect of what we can see is the ability to look at historical data. This one's pretty straightforward. I show this one when I'm showing sales presentations, just because you can follow the bouncing balls as they go. But it's generally we're just talking about historical data. But beyond historical data, I can look and say, let's talk about trending. Let's see what trending is looking at over time. And again, tools that we have as a part of Power BI that are not available on the Dataverse side can really help tell a story of what's going on. In this case, I'm looking at a forecast trend, the revenue won by date. And even beyond that, in the light gray area, I'm seeing sort of a bouncing line because I'm looking at seasonality that the Power BI is determined, saying there's a seasonality component to the data you have. Let me show you what that forecast looks like going forward, and I can see that. Other ways we can see the same data is saying, look back through the data we have, and occasionally there's a day that has just like this really amazing amount of sales, or some event, it's the temperature's too high, or something happens that's out of the ordinary, out of the expectation. We call those anomalies. And within that, we can use a built-in anomaly detection. If you'll notice, I've got a kind of this little gray bubbles here. And those are not things that I have to code in. I just say I want anomaly detection on this graph. And within that, I can say, all right, and Power BI looks at all the data going in and says, okay, for the factors or the criteria that you have, here's what I would expect to see, but we're seeing something outside the range. Let's understand more about what's happening. So Power BI just looks at the data and says, here are things that take an unexpectedly high revenue of January 20th or January 21st. It had a value of 308,000, which is above the expected range based on the criteria in that. And the possible explanations could be the territory, it could be the manager, it could be the purchase process or the campaign type. So we see different factors that show as being a bit out of the norm, and I can see that here as being possible explanations for that data, which is really helpful if I'm working through this with a customer to say, I want you to, if I'm working with a business decision maker and saying, here's how you can understand what's going on inside your data and help you make better decisions. But going beyond that, we have these insights that are available. And this is one that I found to be one of the most powerful parts that Power BI brings to the Dataverse side without any code. You don't have to write any code. You don't have to write any R or Python or any, set up any Databricks or anything. You've just got an ability to say, I want to find out what influences or what's the root cause analysis that causes, in this case, the close percentage, the ratio of wins to losses to increase. And I can see here that I'm asking for what factors influence that, and it just goes ahead and ranks those and says, well, the number one and two factors are the marketing campaign that drove that particular opportunity. If it was one of the promotions and a sales contest, then that has a 12%. It's 12% more likely to win the opportunity. Pardon me, I'm about to sneeze here. Or I can also look at the value of the opportunities and see that value. Here it'll put a scatter plot up to say here's the ratio of how opportunities, the cost of it versus the close ratio is related. So understanding that is very important. And this is really, I'm just looking at one particular one, but we have others that are available. You can factor on the number of days it takes to close that opportunity, what takes longer versus shorter, or discounting. Whatever you really want to manage, you can drop that in, or what do you want to understand, drop that in and allow it to help drive the answers that your business needs. In this case, I'm looking at discounting. Which salesperson is giving out the largest discounts, and that could help us understand that more. Decomp tree is very useful in being able to say, here's a total amount that's out here, but I want to expand that out from the devices that are there. What are the devices that we have? Or here's the accessories. And once I look at the accessories, I might want to break that out into territory. There's my territories, and then even beyond that, I can choose to say I want to break it out by, we'll say industry, and I can see where are my sales of the e-readers in the major pharmaceuticals area. Those are which industries are buying the e-reader pens, and then as I change that, very useful. Now, the other thing that you run into is a lot of times I can build the greatest report ever. It can be an amazing report, but ultimately it's only as valuable as the questions that I've already sort of preloaded, or the graphs I've already put in place. What we can do is use the Q&A feature, natural language query, and go ahead and ask questions of the data. Like, what's the count of the lost category by month as a line chart? And it'll give me that, and I can make changes to that as a bar chart. Or I could say, what is the count of wins? And but as I interact with it, as a manager might interact with that, they can get different questions, different questions answered, and they have another question. The great thing is, a lot of cases, they have a question in the outside of this feature. They'll have a question, and they send it back to the IT department or the BI department and say, "Can you give me a breakdown of this?" And the BI team will build that report, send it back over. They'll look at it and say, "Okay, that was actually what I asked for, but this actually prompts another question. I'd like to drill down even further for just the last month, or for just this particular category, or my salesperson." So they could send it back to BI and ask for a revised report. It comes back, and by that time, somebody's forgotten what's going on, and it's left behind. This way, if we put the natural language query in, there can be that discovery process going on for the manager or for whoever is using this report to understand it better. But all these cases, we're talking about just a report that's baked into the Power App and visible for it. But that's looking at it from a high level perspective. Let's look at it from a different perspective when I'm looking at individual accounts that are out here. And so maybe I'm interested in my account list, and before I have a sales opportunity or a service call to a particular organization, I want to know more about what's going on inside that organization. What's the relationship I have with that colleague or the customer. In this case, I can take a report that's out here, like and I go to King Inc. here, and I'll go to King, and I can see information about them. This is just the standard Power Apps. I've got history of data that's gone on. I've got the contacts that are there. a bit of a company profile, who that person is, what business they're in. But the great thing is I can embed into it. I'm on the King Inc. record. I can embed in an analytics report, and I can embed multiple ones in here. This is the way I was mentioning earlier, how we do it internally is we have a system that has our customers that we're working with. And as soon as I go to that record in our system, I'm seeing multiple reports from multiple systems being filtered to just the record I'm on. So this could be, in this case, it's a customer account. It might be a factory. I did a demo for a manufacturing company in the US, and each of these, the factory locations that they had was an individual record. And so I would go to that factory record and click in, and I could see a Power BI report that describes what's going on in that particular record or that particular location. And then I just went to another location and I saw exactly the same report except filtered to another location. Very important, very useful tool to bring that context together. Now, that's what we have in place right now. Let me show you a thing that what's coming in, and you may already see it in the preview already. I can see, and by the way, this will take a second to load because I'm on the preview version of it. But I now have a visualize this view in Power BI. So I can take a view of data that's sitting in Power BI or in Dynamics or Dataverse and visualize it by clicking on the button in the ribbon. What it's doing is it's taking the definition of that report, the field names, passing it into a Power BI engine, and creating a report on the fly. Now, it does take it a moment. We're working on the speed for it, but it's a way of taking that data and summarizing it. You'll see it's loading it up, and you'll see over on the right-hand side a list of Dataverse, the All Opportunities view. Here are the columns for it, and currently it's showing you the schema name for it. We'll be adding the display name for those columns, and it just takes a quick shot at what are the possible views that I might want to see about an estimated value. Or I could click on count of rows, and it will show me the estimated count of rows and create some out of the box charts for me. With that, even within those, I can take that and say, estimated value by step name. Really, that would look better as a funnel chart. So I'll change that to a funnel. And now I've got a funnel chart. So I've got this nice ability to build a Power BI report internally. And even within that, I can click the show data table, and it will show me the data that's being used to drive this report from down below. Now, again, this is coming. This is part of the preview. This is a preview currently. And the early version of it doesn't allow you to save the report. It's just kind of a runtime on the fly ephemeral report. As soon as I close it, the report's gone. Future iterations very soon will be allowing me to save this either to a Power BI workspace or export it to a PBIX file locally, so that I could then further expand on that. But that's coming in the near future. You'll see that happening coming forward. So I've kind of skipped around here, and I went through. We looked at embedding, and we looked at quick reports. And the next piece that we're going to see coming in the fall is, or not in the fall, it's actually coming in the spring semester, is being able to make the report solution aware. This has not been announced yet. It's in the final pieces of preview, but we're allowing the reports to be added to the solution. And so as I move a solution from one environment to the next, that report gets deployed into the new environment and wires up and connects to the new Dataverse and data that's there. Currently, when I move a report from one environment to the next, I have to just make sure that I'm pointing to the new, moving from test to UAT to prod. I just need to make sure I'm pointing to the right data. This will start helping managing that process so that the solution can move forward within the app. And it's pretty easy to see how it's doing. You can add existing report to a solution. It picks the report. You either pick one that's already in the Dataverse environment or one that's outside. Pick what we're asking for. and then that becomes a part of the solution, and it becomes aware of the environment variables that are there, so that can be, again, moved from solution to solution. So very nice enhancement that's going to be coming out fairly soon. So let's look at some reporting options that we have. How do we report on Dataverse data? This is actually, let me pause for a second. Are there any questions at this point? I haven't been watching any of the chat window. Are there any questions, I guess, in the queue, or shall I roll on into how to connect the dots?
Yeah, people were posting some basic questions. So just step back, explaining Dataverse versus Data Lake versus Synapse.
Yeah. So Dataverse, just for awareness, again, like I mentioned earlier, the Dataverse, I wouldn't call it a database like I would, SQL Azure. In fact, Dataverse, way down below underneath the covers where you can't actually access it, is sitting on side of SQL Azure. The data is being stored there, but it's a data application layer on top of it that wraps up the security, metadata. It wraps up APIs, allowing you to interact with it through web calls. All that piece is part of that Dataverse layer that makes it very easy to use inside of a business app. So let's talk a little bit about how these two tools to work together. What are the choices that I have when I'm operating on Dataverse data? Dataverse, because of the nature of exactly that question, I don't have access to hit the underlying tables down at the bottom of the stack. I can't hit those directly. I have ability to interact with a TDS, a tabular data stream endpoint, that allows me to query it just like as if I had access to it. I can write a SQL statement against it, but all the results that are coming back to me are being pulled through the filter of the security model that's in place. So here's an example of, here's 3 ways in which we deal with getting data out. And we have already in the app, there's a Dataverse button in the ribbon, and it will point you to that environment. You can choose the environment you want to pull the data from. You can set that up. It's very straightforward. But what that's doing is that's connecting to that Dataverse environment. You can do that with direct query, or you can do it in import mode. And there's obvious advantages. There's obvious differences in terms of how you're going to approach that if you're working with import mode versus direct query. So think about direct query. Obviously, if you're familiar with Power BI already, you know that direct query has some inherent overhead. It's uncached data. The data is only retrieved when the user opens the report, versus an import where the data is already pre-cached and preloaded, pre-calculated, and ready for the user. As soon as that report opens, the data is already there. Direct query, it's going out and retrieve it. The difference on that case is that as a user, as an administrator, I can deploy the same report to multiple people in my organizations. And if I have a security model that says, this team is allowed to, the EMEA team can see the opportunities in EMEA, and the North American team can see the opportunities in US and Canada, and APAC can see their opportunities. Dataverse will protect that. The Dataverse, you can implement that inside of Dataverse, and that will be inherited in the reports inside of Power BI. There's a downside because it's a process, because it's pulling it out. Again, it's not cache data. The import side, you need to handle the reporting permissions internally inside, like row level security inside of Power BI. That would need to be implemented. So you need to take responsibility for filtering the data accordingly, if that's necessary. In some cases, it's not necessary, but if it's necessary, you would need to partition that data or filter it using your own model that you set up inside of Dataverse. But it does give you the faster report. Both of those have a boundary of, there's not a hard number boundary other than the results that are returned in a single query cannot take more than 2 minutes to render. It's a long time. It can't take more than 2 minutes, and the results can't contain more than 80 megabytes. Right? Now the data behind the scenes can be, however many gigs you want, but the result set needs to be under 80 megabytes in that result set in either of these first two options, just because of the nature of the way the TDS endpoint works. It has that boundary to prevent it from falling over, whatever. The third option, the third option there is this Azure Synapse link, which is a new feature in Dataverse. Going back to the Dataverse side here, and if I go to the Maker app, this is really where I configure Dataverse. I have an Azure Synapse link option that then I can choose to manage tables and say, I want these tables synchronized to an Azure data lake. I'll put that out there, and it's going to wrap a Azure Synapse in front of that. I can choose the tables, and as I make changes inside of Dataverse, there's an ongoing process that links and updates those records inside the Synapse on the Synapse side. It's writing it out to a CSV file currently, and it then becomes part of what's available to report on coming out of Azure Synapse. Actually, I was going to show this later, but I'll show it now. It creates a serverless SQL lake, a serverless SQL database on the data that sits in the lake. In this case, I'm looking at my data. Here's my serverless SQL. I've got account and account partitioned. And then I've gone ahead and separately, I went ahead and created my own serverless SQL database to put views in front of it, because I wanted to filter the data beyond just what was being pulled out of Dataverse. I wanted to refine it and clean it up, making sure exactly what I want it to look like. So in this case, I'm going to get, I've chosen to say these are the only 8 or 9 columns that I'm interested in, and I want them filtered accordingly, and I'll bring that out, and it's going to return that data. I can see that in a separate window here, and look at it in SSMS. I can see that here's my tables coming from Dataverse over here, but the Dataverse ADL table that I've created, this is mine that I created. It has no tables in it. I just have views. Each view points back to the source there and says, let me filter the data. In fact, let's look at the account. I'll show you what that view looks like, so you see the gist of it. But yeah, so it's just pointing to the data that's in my data lake, and actually in my case, I wanted to filter out any accounts that didn't have a corresponding sales opportunity. So I wanted to narrow it down to a particular area, and I wanted to create a blank record, just for no record, a null record basically. So I've done all this, and I can control this one. I don't have any control over this other than telling which tables I want synchronized. But in this case, I've gone and created it here, so I have complete control. Again, that's the Azure Synapse data link experience that lets me synchronize the data from Dataverse into a data lake and report on it from that perspective. Again, it's much more for the enterprise perspective. For those sides, the limitations. I think I've already covered most of these. Consideration. One thing to be aware of. It's probably not as it's more of a big deal in my colleagues in the Asia Pacific, or the further you are from the UTC time zone, you get more variance, because the data inside of Dataverse is stored as UTC, but Dataverse has a feature to display that data in your local time zone. So in Dataverse, it's displaying in that local time zone, but the data itself is UTC. So you want to be aware of that consideration when you're pulling data from there. You may need to handle the adjustment of the date time. So which connection is right? As always, the answer is it depends. It's kind of the standard answer for all these questions, but some categories to think about if we're talking about the query result side. Again, like I said, if it's under 80 megabytes for the query result, again, it could be millions of records out there, but I'm looking at my opportunities for this month or my opportunities for this year. If that result is less than 80 megabytes, you're fine to just pull it from directly. If you're dealing with something, I need to boil the ocean, I need 3 years worth of data from thousands of opportunities and thousands of users, you really want that extra power of Azure Synapse to go after massive amounts of data. The complexity of the query, you're really looking at very straightforward SQL queries in Dataverse. And in fact, it's even kind of a restricted SQL. You can't do like common table expressions. There's a few things you can't do that you would be able to do in a normal SQL, but it's a constrained SQL that you need to go after with the Dataverse connector. Synapse, you don't have those limitations. You could write Spark, SQL, straightforward SQL, serverless. You can do instantiate, memorize tables. Lots of things that are available there from that. Finally, data mashup. Definitely with Dataverse, you're doing Dataverse plus Power Query. So in the extract, you can go after other tables as well and bring it together. But you're kind of doing that as piecemeal basis. On the Synapse side, you've got the data warehouse usually, and you can go after all the data that's been pulled together. Latency on the Synapse, on the Dataverse, when you query it, you're getting the current data from that query at that moment of the query. On Synapse, they're really going after a near real time, but it's really more likely you're just going to be looking at an hourly snapshot because it pulls an offline hourly snapshot. Currently, they're working on that, but it's pulling an offline hourly snapshot of here's the data at that moment, and that can be all the data you need. For most cases, that's sufficient, but effort to implement Dataverse, very simple. Azure Synapse, any of the export, you've got to have to handle additional security if needed, if the organization needs it. Some do, some don't. We've already talked about Dataverse connector. It's right there in the ribbon. It's a nice little swirly, and I can then choose the environment that I'm going after, drill further into it to get the data that I'm interested in. I can write a SQL statement and go after the same location, write a query, again, a filtered query. I can even put in there a current user, put current underscore user as a variable, so I can filter it to just the records that have my user ID in them. So that's an advantage you can do. You can write that query and go after the data from that perspective using SQL. But best practices. Now, some of these best practices are just data direct query generalized. Some of them are focused on the data query, direct query with Dataverse, but in general, when you're building a direct query report, stay focused on the use case. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on customer environments where the person I was working with was handed a set of requirements, and as we worked together to build that requirement, they kept receiving new expanded requirements and changes to the requirements, and it kept evolving, and all of a sudden you had this spaghetti of report that had all kinds of tables, things from all across the thing. It can become out of control. The Dataverse side thinks of things in a Dataverse schema. We don't want to do that. We want to think of it as a star schema, and there's a lot of details around that as to what that would look like. But if you're comfortable with Dataverse data, be aware you're going to have to rethink that data when you pull it into a Power BI. You need to think of it in terms of a star schema as opposed to that relational model. And if you're a Power BI person trying to help a Dataverse person, understand that they have a certain schema in their mind as the model of their data. You're going to have to translate that into a star, as you know. Minimizing the query columns, just simplify to improve the speed. Out of the box, if I go to an account record, it's got over 1,000 columns when I include all the lookups and labels. So, you really don't usually need that. Query editor, avoid blocks of text. As you know, as a Power BI person, you don't need that. And then, because those are really not analytical fields you would count. minimizing the choice labels. There's some choices there. Being aware of dual mode if you're using that for filtering for reports. Dual mode if you're using direct query can help you improve some performance with that. And then finally, of course, ensure that the query is folding by choosing that and making sure that the data, you're putting as much effort on, much of the workload onto Dataverse up front. Finally, when you submit and report on it, make sure you check the checkbox up above, because that will ensure that the user who's viewing it, their permissions are going to be used to actually view that report, and they'll get the filtered data according to what they are needing. Finally, I've got a list of resources that are available. There's DevCamp, some templates that are out there, and then this deck, and I'll be sure to include a link here as to where you can find that. I do want to call out, there is a Microsoft Learn learning path that's in the documents. It talks about design effectiveness, learning how to make a report look and feel not just pretty, because pretty is one thing, but really thinking of how to make it usable for somebody who isn't already familiar with that report. I can tell you some of the first reports I built were just horrible. I mean, they were brilliant to me, but then as soon as I saw somebody else trying to use them, they were just like, oh, it doesn't make sense. But this course is very useful, and it's a free course from Microsoft about how to think about design and making that report friendly and consumable and accessible to the end users. It's really good. I just want to, not related to Dataverse or anything else, but it's useful. Anyway, that's my context, and I'll be happy to stop there and thank you, and go from there. Any questions at that point?
Yeah.
I know it's starting to run out of time here. I want to make sure I paused here.
Thank you. All good. So if anybody has a question, just put it in a chat or unmute yourself. But thanks, Scott. This was a great introduction. Also, from my side, I wasn't aware of all of these features in Dynamics, so it was a really interesting thing.
Yeah. Again, that Venn diagram is like two circles that just barely touch sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to bring those together a little bit more, get a little bit more overlap, so that because it's amazing, people who have the Power BI experience have so much they can offer to the business that they don't often get taken advantage. They don't, their value is underappreciated, and this is a way to help make sure you're appreciated for what you can bring to the business by intersecting with the applications they're using.
Yeah, thank you. It's great. So people are typing. See some questions will pop up.
So I'll pause the share so I can maybe see the chat window. But anyway, I hope this has been helpful. Everybody's been useful to the process, and look forward to.
So also people, if you miss something, recording will be available on our YouTube channel. So in upcoming days, so feel free to watch it again. I know I will whenever I go and connect to Dynamics. I will go back here and see what did I missed.
Terrific.
Okay, if there are no questions, it was a pleasure to have you with us, Scott. So also for all of you joined today, hope to see you next time as well. All of our recordings are available on our YouTube channels, usually a few days after the session. And follow the Meetup channel for all the upcoming things. And we give you back half an hour. So it was great opportunity to learn something new today. So Scott, thanks for your time. Also, I know that's earlier in your area than it's with us in Europe, but it was really good.
Very good. Well, I appreciate very much the opportunity, And if you're going to be at SQL Bits, say hello. I look forward to meeting you in person at SQL Bits. And
Sure.
if anybody else is there, please stop by and say hello.
Thank you. See you then on SQL Bits.
All right.
Thank
Have
you,
a
Scott.
great day.
You too.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.